COVID-19 pandemic is spreading and affecting countries across the globe and bringing economies to a halt. The solar industry at large and also in India is not insulated from the pandemic's impact. The COVID-19 outbreak comes at a time when the country's solar project execution is at its peak. India has ambitious targets of achieving 100 gigawatt solar energy by 2022. As of January 2020, India has installed approximately 35 gigawatt of solar energy projects. It will be interesting to see how India's solar sector tackles the issues due to the coronavirus outbreak and plots a strategy to achieve its targets. Next, we have a fireside chat on India's solar growth story in the new normal, identifying challenges and opportunities with Pradeep Kumar M, Director of Business, India and Sri Lanka region, LONGi Solar, and Sabyasachi Majumdar, Senior Vice President and Group Head, Corporate Sector Ratings, ICRA Limited. Over to you, gentlemen.
Good evening. This is Sabyasachi Majumdar. I welcome you, all of you to our fireside chat, which is on India's solar growth story in the new normal, identifying challenges and opportunities. I have with me Mr. Pradeep Kumar, who is the Director of Business, India and Sri Lanka region for LONGi Solar. I'd like to begin in by thanking Sudhir and his team at ET for giving me this opportunity to bring this chat to you. So the way I'm going to do this is that first we'll look at what is the opportunity for the solar business in the country. Then we'll dwell upon some time on how the manufacturing business is shaping up, what are the key, technological innovations, what are the challenges that we are facing. And finally, I would also like to get Mr. Pradeep Kumar's perspective on what can be done to, augment the manufacturing business and what it really take for India to get the biggies to invest in India for manufacturing and not selling here. So Pradeep, first of all, welcome to you and thanks for taking your valuable time to join us in this program. So Pradeep, let me begin straight away by asking you, what do you see as the market size? I mean, obviously, we have been doing fairly significant volumes, although they have been fluctuating. But given the fact that solar looks like a long-term story, it looks like here to stay given the low tariffs. What is the kind of volume that you're looking at? Let's suppose from the grid-connected projects as well as from rooftop and other segments. How do you see the solar space shaping up over the next couple of years?
Okay, thank you for your time and for inviting me for this fire chat as well. So I am Pradeep. I take care of the Indian and Sri Lankan business for LONGi Solar. Yes, India is one of the most important market for LONGi, and in fact for any company which is pertaining to solar. The reason being the potential is huge. We all know that. I still remember a long time ago when we had first RA Invest Meet and the Prime Minister announced a target of almost like 100 gigawatt of target in solar. I think many people were there. We had pessimist people, we had optimistic people discussing a lot of things by then, telling that the numbers are unrealistic. I mean, 100 gigawatt is a big number because initially we were at a very small capacity in India. But over a period of, I think, past 4 or 5 years, we have seen tremendous growth in terms of potential, in terms of the amount of installations we do in India, despite facing several challenges in the industry. So now the initial target set, which is 100 gigawatt, looks to be very easy because we already have around 90 to 100 gigawatt of solar projects, which are either commissioned or under planning stage already. So India is moving in a good, I think, direction in a very fast pace, despite facing several challenges in the past. In fact, if this pandemic was not there, I think the number would have been even higher. Now that we have a new target set by the government, which is 300 gigawatt, I think we at LONGi are committed to provide the best in class of technology and product to India to ensure that solar is most cost effective and reliable energy for our grids. Now, coming to this number, I think 300 gigawatt itself is too much of interesting number, because even if we could do around 200 or 250 gigawatt of solar over a period of next few years, I think each and every company who is into this sector will definitely grow, because the numbers are huge, and it's not impossible. We have certain amount of domestic capacity, I think, which can cater for DCR contents, even for rooftop segments on a larger scale. But at the same time, for utility projects, we have to do it in a bigger scale. We do have a lot of companies supporting from across the world. I think China is one of the major contributor as well. Uh, the products are good, with high efficiencies, good reliability standards, highly bankable companies supporting the Indian business. So what happens is, if we actually plan to do a huge amount of projects in India, I think the potential will support all the manufacturers or all the developers or even the EPC companies to grow quickly and make solar business as a reliable business. Now, 300 gigawatt is a big number. We know it's a challenge. It's a big challenge in front of us. I think we all have to see this number in a very holistic way, because it's not possible to achieve this number if the vendors are not supporting, or if the financiers are not supporting, or if the manufacturers are not supporting, or even if we don't have good developers or EPCs doing these projects in India. So we all need to work together along with the government as well, to streamline the policies, probably discuss on bettering how the existing policies are, or probably even giving ideas on like what might be the policies which can support this kind of huge volume of projects in India. So we are working very closely with the government. In fact, it's not only LONGi. I can tell all the tier one manufacturers have good amount of capacity which can cater to the solar requirements across the globe. In fact, LONGi itself has around 50 gigawatt of capacity right now, and last year we supplied around 24 plus gigawatt globally, which means the capacity is abundant. It's only that we need to plan well in advance. We need to plan for the unforeseen kind of challenges which can come up in the industry. We need to plan well in terms of supply chain, in terms of logistics, and definitely I think we are on the right track. And the past 3 to 4 years of hurdles what India have faced probably when it comes to doing solar projects, I think every developer or EPC or even the government has learned a lot of things, and they know how to tackle the situation now. So definitely, if you're telling about the numbers, it's very attractive in terms of going greener, because it's not just the need of government. I think it's a need of the world altogether, because of the increasing carbon footprints. We all need to work together to make this planet a greener planet. And yes, LONGi is always there, and we are working very closely with all the developers and EPCs, including the government, to see what best can be done and can optimize and give good solutions for the business in India. Every number what we see is really attractive. May it be the policies, may it be the upcoming policies, which we can see a lot of policies like the production linked incentive schemes or the BCDs, which will also entertain the players from outside India to come up and then probably even put forward their manufacturing setup in India. So that will not only create employment here, that will not only generate revenues for the Indian government, but also generate revenues for the parent companies across the globe. So this is good for all. I think the policies are good. India is going in a right direction. We are all working for this greener world. I think it's really promising for everyone who works in this field right now.
So I think, Pradeep, you rightly said that we are doing about 8 to 10 gigawatts. Now,
Yeah.
obviously, there is no doubt that the country's, energy market can support 8 to 10 gigawatts. But my first question would be, realistically, how much further up it can be scaled? Because it has an implication on whether, the country is, going to be an attractive market for, investors to put into manufacturing. So let's suppose if we are doing 8 to 10 gigawatts, how much realistically we can scale up over the next 2 to 3 years? I mean, let's assume that the energy, the total electricity offtake does not grow by more than 5 to 6%. Then, of course, let's remember that our transmission system also has its own constraint. after all, solar, has this particular, time dimension and all. I mean, it does not generate through, I mean, it's an intermittent source of power. So obviously, the other part of the story has to be balanced. So given the reality of the demand mix, reality of the transmission structure, and the fact that in electricity demand, it's very difficult to project beyond 5 to 6%. Realistically, up to what level do you think that a domestic market can absorb? And if you'd like to give some ballpark, break up into the, utility scale projects and rooftop, captive. So, if you can give a broad ballpark of what kind of breakup can be expected.
Okay, I think so. India has been learning a lot when it comes to doing solar projects in India. So, if we take an example of probably the situation which we had probably 4 to 5 years back, we were not doing to a scale of what we are doing it right now. So, initially we had several challenges. In fact, the grid challenges and other challenges, what you have mentioned, I think it was already there before as well. But over a period of years, we could see that the potential has increased a lot. In fact, 2 3 years back itself, we have touched around 10 gigawatt of projects every year. But unfortunately, because of the new surprising policies, or even the new pandemic which is going on, or probably we can tell the supply chain issues which were not predicted before. Now this volume has again come down probably to a scale of 6 or even 7 gigawatt per annum. But if you if you take my idea, I think doing around 15 or even 20 gigawatt of project in the coming year itself is not a big challenge. But now we foresee that after April, there is a BCD which is again coming up. So how the industry reacts, or probably whether we will have a kind of exemption for the already planned projects, or probably will there be an extension for 5 to 6 months in terms of implementation. Now all these factors will come into picture. Now after 2022, I think things will be more clear about BCD, or even the supply chain issues what we have right now will get settled by then. So we see that doing around 15 or even 20 gigawatt of projects in India is not a big thing, because by then either the solar will go slightly out of feasibility because of 40% BCD, or probably government will take some initiatives to either reduce the BCD level, or some other like exceptions for big projects or anything. Because if that is done, then I think the solar will again become feasible. And even if the 40% BCD is being implemented, I think what will happen is the ultimate tariff will go high. So in that case, will the discounts be able to absorb such kind of an increase is something which government also has to think about. So I think we will have a time over a period of next 12 to 14 months, I think, when things will settle down, both when it comes to the supply chain issues, or probably the policies as well, which seems to be a little bit of confusing right now. So if you ask me, after 2022, or I can tell from the beginning of 2023, I think doing 15 to 20 gigawatt of solar projects is not a difficulty for India if well planned. Now, this is one part. If you ask me about the breakup, I think India is still going on a majority for utility scale, and I think this will also continue until and unless we have very good policies in terms of subsidies or the rebates which comes up for the rooftop. Because just to take an example, even being an individual consumer, if I get a benefit of installing a solar power at my home and getting good amount of subsidies from the government, and then ultimately cutting off my power bills for the next 20 or 25 years, if that becomes affordable for me, then definitely I think all the people who are aware of this solar power might go for the rooftop projects as well, even in the small scale. Now, again, we have a challenge because this will become completely decentralized. So how do we manage the grid in case, because if I install a 10 kilowatt of solar power at my house, and if I use only probably 2 or 3 kilowatt, and if I have to supply the balance to the grid, so there will be multiple amount of supplies which will happen to the grid as well. So how do we manage that kind of supplies is also something which we have to look at. But once we have like the maturity in terms of the policies, especially when it comes to the rooftop policies, I think rooftop will pick up, because that is something which will entertain every individual to go for a solar project. And this we already could see in a few developed countries like Europe and all, wherein if you go, the rooftop solar is on a larger scale as compared to the utility scale as well. Of course, taking it from the bigger utility projects and then supplying it through discoms also is a good way. but if managed well. But ultimately, if there are benefits which comes directly to the individual, I think rooftop segment will grow. So on a general note, if you ask my opinion, then probably till 2024 or something, we might see a large amount of utility projects, and then later rooftop projects also might grow, because that is when I think the government also will roll out a lot of policies for rooftop sector.
I do take the point that we should not be too discouraged by the recent pandemic based issues which brought down the capacity addition to about 6 to 7 gigawatt, because it's a transient factor, which is something once in a blue moon, so we can't really expect it. But are there other issues? For example, we are seeing in several states, this talk about renegotiation of tariffs, scrapping the bids because power is available in subsequent bids cheaper. Do you think that these kind of noises could have a more sustained impact on which might attenuate the domestic capacity addition? I mean, from the developer's perspective, in terms of the total gigawattage to be added in the domestic market.
No, this certainly happens because you rightly pointed out there are a lot of issues when it comes to probably we can tell that in simple words, even if a huge amount of volume of solar power is generated, but if there are no ultimate end customers or probably the purchasers for this power which has been produced economically, then ultimately things will go on a hit. So you're right. We have a good example of what has happened in probably 2019, the AP issues as well. But at the same time, I think all the developers are more closely working with the government to see that these kind of issues will not come, because ultimately the developers are also accountable for the projects they do, and they have to pay back the finances what they take from outside. So these are all the stepping stones, I can tell. I think India has faced a lot of issues. In fact, USD to INR conversion issues, or probably issues like what we had in AP, especially when it comes to the PPA.
It's good to hear that you are very optimistic about the potential of the domestic market to absorb large investments in solar capacities.
Yeah.
Now, my next question would be, over the medium term, let's say over the next 2 to 3 years, what could be the realistic share of domestic manufacturing as part of the total market? I mean, if we are doing, let's say, 15 gigawatts, realistically, how much can we expect to come from, domestic capacities? How much could come from imported? And do you think this, this basic customs duty and other things would encourage domestic manufacturing? Okay. And would also the fact that, this recent, there were a lot of, disruptions in the supply chain. Would you think that this would result in the developers, trying to hedge their supplies by putting greater volumes on domestic manufacturers vis-a-vis, imports from China or elsewhere?
Mm-hmm. So let me touch upon this with probably one or two examples, because that makes it very important for us to understand how domestic manufacturing can be entertained, or probably the efficiencies and other things can be improved. Because if you ask me on a thumb rule, I think over a period of next 1 or 2 years, the majority of supply will still be imports, despite having the BCD in place. Because ultimately what will happen is there are 2 or 3 factors which comes into picture. One is the cost of domestically manufactured modules or the cells, because India right now has around 15 gigawatt of capacity, the local module manufacturing capacity, out of which we can tell around 7 to 8 gigawatt is properly operational. Now, what we need to understand is what is the technology these people are adopting right now. We could see that not more than 10 to 15% of Indian manufacturing right now is into mono technology. The balance everything is in poly, which means around 80 to 80%, 80 to 85% of the manufacturing is still with poly technology. Now, this is already getting phased out from the world. If that happens, how will domestic manufacturer get more and more orders, especially when it comes to the bigger projects, especially utility projects? Because if you tell rooftop projects, I think still the domestic content is, the supply from domestic factories are even in a higher scale right now, because of a lot of schemes which government has rolled out and the DCR schemes which has come up. But when it comes to utility scale, I think the supply is still from the majorly from the companies like LONGi, Jinko. These are all based out of India. Second reason is the efficiencies. Now, One is the technology, what we have told, that the things have to move towards the latest technology, because that is when you get better LCOs for the project. That is when you get better returns for the project. Second is the efficiencies of the modules what we produce, or the watt peak of the modules what we produce. Now, we can take example of any of the manufacturers in India. I think the capacity is still, I think the capacity as well as the technology is far behind as compared to the manufacturing what is happening in China right now. We also need to understand why this has happened. Earlier, I think long back when China didn't have much of solar production, I think everything was more in the European countries. Now, how that got shifted to China as a major market, that's something which I think even I told in the last session as well, because that is a result of continuous efforts, or the probably I can tell the support from the government, wherein they created good policies and they've created support for billions and billions of dollars of investment over a period of few years, and they entertained it on a to be produced on a massive scale. That is when the entire technology got shifted to China. Why don't we do the same thing in India? India is a huge potential. In fact, India, even if we have plans, even only for 300 gigawatt, I can tell you, it will be much more in coming years, in fact. But even if 300 gigawatt, if we can put up something like around 15 or 20 gigawatt of capacity with mono technology, with higher efficiency cells getting manufactured in India, I think that is something which will really entertain. I can tell a lot of projects which will be going on in a very smooth manner, because once you start local manufacturing in India, uh, issues of logistics will go away, because currently you can tell as compared to 2020, end of 2020, the current shipping cost from China to India has increased like too many times. Earlier, we can tell if there is a X cost, now the cost is almost 5x. So that also affects a lot of projects which comes up here. So if you ask me, I think over a period of next 2 to 3 years, the government has to work on a few policies which has to be long term, that will make all the investments coming from China or even from other part of the world to India, and then run here on a long run. Because see, to take it as an example of LONGi itself, we have been exploring options of manufacturing in India from, I can tell, 3 to 4 years. But why it has not happened? For a company like LONGi, I think putting up a 2 to 3 gigawatt of module manufacturing or even cell manufacturing in India is not a big deal, because we know the technology, we have all the skills, we have been working in this technology for over 20 years. But what is stopping us to put up a factory here? Now, that is something which we seek a clarity from government as well, because we need to work on long-term policies. Now, if there is a very clear-cut policy for long-term, and based on that, if we plan our own profits, of course, nobody is here to do business with loss. So, if we plan our own profits, if we plan our own manufacturing setup based on those policies, definitely, I think it's not only LONGi. I think each and every vendor who is good in technology would like to come to India and then support the Indian business. So, domestic manufacturing will be good once we have a clear cut policies. Till then, I think the same thing will continue, because even if you ask now, not more than 1 or 2 gigawatt of manufacturing is with mono modules. So how long this poly technology will run? The story will be somewhat similar to the thermal, I think, cycle as compared to solar, because solar is increasing, but the thermal capacity might slightly reduce. So this is what will happen when it comes to mono as well as the poly technology. So India currently has more of poly technology. So if you ask me the share in coming years, I think it will gradually reduce, because despite having BCD, if the manufacturing from China or other part of country, other part of the world doesn't come to India on a whole, I think there will be more of imports, like you as compared to the domestic consumption, even after the 40% BCD. Because even with 40% BCD, I think when we do the costing over a period of longer time with a better efficiencies and better returns, I think still importing makes more sense. We seek a lot of clarity. We seek, in fact, we are on our toes to put up our manufacturing in India. So we definitely are working on that. We are exploring a lot of options. And I think BCD is one good part wherein we feel a very positive kind of an environment being built for people from outside to come and put their factory in India. We're also working with some other relevant authorities to get more clarity on the policies. So I think once that happens, then the Indian manufacturing also will contribute a lot for domestic projects. Now, again, the bifacial technology is pretty much new to India, because it's not accepted in a large scale. I mean, I cannot call it as a new technology, but it's not accepted on a large scale, because countries like Middle East, wherein the reflection from the soil, or I can tell the sand, is much higher as compared to India. I think they were the first and few countries to accept bifacial technology on a large scale, because any new technology which comes, the cost will be obviously higher because of the R&D cost built into it, and also the kind of because as and when the technology improves, I think people will start moving into the massive scale production. Now that is when the cost also becomes effective. So N-type is the new technology, so we are still yet to mass produce, and the initial cost might be higher. But on a general note, once the efficiencies are better, once the returns are better, that is something which will start getting accepted on a massive scale. And we feel that this is something which will come up in the future. So N-type is something which we can foresee in 2022 as a bright future. And India is also shifting from monofacial technology to bifacial right now, because we could see that a lot of developers, although we're not so much encouraging for going on a large scale in 2020, but in 2021 we can see that many of the major players like Adani, Renew, Tata, or all the major developers whom we can name, I think they're all shifting or probably wants to try a bigger scale of project, probably you can tell 400 or 500 megawatt scale with a bifacial product, although the cost is higher, because they know that the returns are better. They want to have it right. They've learned that the returns are much better from other countries, looking at the installation of other countries. So we feel that 2022, again, the industry in India, the solar industry in India might shift from monofacial to bifacial technology. N-type bifacial is something which we also see as a future for India and across the globe as well. Now, there is one more aspect which we need to, which I would like to touch upon in a very short manner. Going for a higher size module is not the ultimate solution, because even for a company like LONGi, producing a 700 or even 750 watt peak module is not a big deal. But we also need to see how this will impact, I can tell, the BOS and the other costs related to that, because bigger the size of module, you will have a lot of other difficulties when it comes to the back end integration. So we still feel that the 540, 545 kind of module, what we are producing right now with 182 wafers, I think this is still the optimum. So on a general note, to conclude, 182 wafer based modules up to 540, 550 or even 560 watt peak with N-type and bifacial will be the future for India in coming
Okay.
years.
Now, since I'm glad that you touched upon prices, so just wanted to touch upon something which is of great deal of interest and attracting a lot of newspaper articles. I mean, the prices have gone up. So, what has been driving this? And do you think that this reversal in price trends is likely to be sustained, or do we see, it again coming back on a downward trajectory after a few months?
Okay, so it's a good question. I'll not be touching anything specific on the numbers, but I would like to give an idea of what is happening right now and probably what might happen in the future as well. There are two major reasons. In fact, we can tell two or three major reasons which started increasing the price of these modules from, I can tell, the second half of last year, because everything was going okay, even though pandemic was there, but price was not getting as a big hit. But ultimately, the prices started increasing. To start with, I think initially silicon was one of the factors, because polysilicon factory like GCL, which were a major contributor for the raw material of doing the cells and modules, I think it got fire, and there was all of a sudden 10 gigawatt of reduction in terms of capacity in China. So that is when suddenly the silicon prices started increasing last year, and that is when it reflected on the increase in module prices as well. But then good part is, I think China as an industry is very well matured, so they were able to, I think, mitigate the losses in a very short period of time. But unfortunately, what happened is the glass shortage started coming into picture. All the major reason being the imbalance in the supply and demand, because all of a sudden there was a stop. Probably we can tell by beginning of February, March, the entire global requirement of modules came to a halt because of the lockdowns and many other things happening in last year. Indian demand also all of a sudden stopped because entire India was in a lockdown for almost 2.5 months. European demand dipped, US demand dipped. So what will happen? All of a sudden there is a imbalance in supply chain. Now we got used to the system, we got used to the lockdowns, we got used to the pandemic, and then slowly we know that we have to do projects. Then that is when all of a sudden the demand also started increasing. Now this happened across the globe. So usually what happens is that demand in India is in a peak in Q1, like from we can tell January to March, because it is financial year ending. And then usually in China it happens from October to December again because of their own financial year ending. So all this kind of distribution was there earlier to the pandemic, but now all of a sudden there was complete imbalance, and all of a sudden there was a huge demand, and for that the glass supply was not sufficient. When the glass supply is not sufficient, you cannot do modules to the level, although you have enough capacities in your factories, you're not able to do the modules because you don't have glass. Now that is when the glass prices started increasing. And unlike any other raw material, glass is something which is very specific for manufacturing expansion, because the government has a lot of restrictions in China for expansion of glass capacity. So even if there is a dip in polysilicon capacity, you can immediately put some investments and try to expand the capacity, but you cannot do the same in glass because of a lot of restrictions laid by Chinese government due to the environmental factors. Now this is something which is challenging, which is going on even now, and this glass supply challenge will even continue till mid of next year. Now glass supply ongoing challenge is going on. At the same time, polysilicon prices have increased a lot because they know that the demand is increasing, because the China government itself are bound to do almost 70 gigawatt of projects this year, so they increase their own prices. Thirdly, the logistics also know that they have huge demand across the globe, so they increase their own prices for almost 4 to 5 times. Now, when these things happen all together, even though we are vertically integrated, how much price impact we can absorb? We cannot do. I mean, because ultimately we are also dependent on many of the sources. So gradually, I think every vendor try to absorb as much as possible, but ultimately now we see that there is a price point at which the business doesn't make sense for us. So we that kind of a price is already very high, and I think this will continue till end of the year. And then we feel that probably by mid of the January or even February, once the China demand comes down, and once the glass supply constraints start reducing, and once the polysilicon issue also slowly reduces, and once the logistics imbalance also comes into a stable manner, I think the prices will start bettering. But it will not go to a level when probably we don't predict that the prices will go very low like the level we had by mid of last year. So there will be obviously a recovery from the beginning of next year, but it will be slow and it will be stable. This is what we predict. So by mid of next year, I think we should be able to have good, better prices. And by then, I think the new technologies also will come in picture. And I think things has to roll on a smooth manner. That is something which we predict.
Would you like to hazard, how much fresh capacities could come up? I mean, let's say Chinese key, manufacturers, how much, they would be willing to invest in terms of gigawattage, in terms of solar manufacturing, if you had to put some ballpark number in India.
Okay, the ideal number, I think for any manufacturer, or I can specifically tell probably a tier 1 manufacturer would plan to do is to start with a module manufacturing of maybe 2 or 3 gigawatt in India. Once it gets stabilized, I think once the supplies start stabilizing, because we also have an advantage of not just supplying for Indian projects, probably for US projects as well, because I worked in my previous venture as well. I worked for a Chinese company, and we also had put up a manufacturing base in Bangalore, and the factory was good enough to supply for Indian projects as well as for the US projects. So we see a promising kind of a future definitely for manufacturing in India. So with that case, I think everybody, all the tier 1 manufacturer, whoever is planning to put up a factory in India, I think the ballpark number would be either 2 or 3 gigawatt of module manufacturing to be set up in India.
That's quite encouraging to hear. Pradeep, thank you very much. I really appreciate the amount of time you have given to us, the insights that you have given. So there is some very good takeaways on the pricing, on the demand. So thank you again. And on that note, I close the session, and I would like to thank Team ET again for giving us this chance to have a chat with you.
Thank you, Mr. Sabyasachi, and the entire ET team as well. I think in these kind of pandemic times, such sessions give a very good insight in terms of what is happening, probably through vendors or from a developer point of view, or even from an investor point of view, or from the government point of view. So really thankful for ET, and thank you, Mr. Sabyasachi, as well. It was really good. And ultimately, I would like to tell, stay home, stay safe, and get vaccinated as soon as possible. Let's all fight this pandemic together, and let's see a great future in terms of solar in India. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen, for getting deep into the topic. Ladies and gentlemen, let's make this event trend on social media. So let the tweets coming using the hashtag ET Energy Leadership. Stay connected.